Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. This week's guest, Leanne Lord, is a stand-up comic and solo caregiver for elderly parents. We discuss the challenges of being a caregiver and how those responsibilities are often taken up by people who are not married with children. She gives some tips for caregivers, and we finish by discussing some ways to begin preparing for getting old yourself. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Leanne Lord. Leanne is a stand-up comic and author of several humor books, such as Dict Jokes, that's D-I-C-T, and Real Women Do It Standing Up. She's the former co-host of Star Talk Radio with Neil deGrasse Tyson and is the creator of the People with Parents podcast, where she examines the role reversal between adult children and aging parents. Welcome, Leanne.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So for a long time, I've wanted to talk about caregiving parents, aging parents, from a solo perspective, that is, as a single person, for good reason. One is there's been some research that shows that single children tend to do more of the caregiving than their married counterparts. So that is that if there are two kids in a family, one's single, one's married, the single one tends to do more of the caregiving when a parent starts to age and have problems and so on.
Oh, yeah. Being married is the get out of jail free card. I'm busy saving my marriage. I'm busy watching them sleep. People, there's all reasons to get out of this job.
So I wanted to do something about caregiving. I personally have gone through it. I'll talk to you a little bit about my experience. And then this is such a serious topic, I wanted a little bit of a lighthearted approach. And so we've been Twitter pals for many years now, and I figured out that you have this podcast, and I listened to some of the episodes, and you obviously take a humorous approach to explaining your experiences. And so I thought we'd just jump right in.
Sure.
And maybe you could talk about your story. You're actively caregiving parents.
Yes. Well, I'm down one parent. Down one parent, which oddly enough doesn't really make it all that easier. You know, they say two live as cheaply as one. That's not true either. These are societal myths. So, but I started with two. I'm only down to one. It's not my fault. I didn't break one. I didn't lose them at Home Depot. But yeah, I gotta admit, I went in the slow way. Like, my parents are from that generation where everything's fine. The house is on fire. I just need a glass of water. You know, my arm's hanging off. I just need duct tape. So they were fine for a long time until they weren't. Okay. And I started noticing more and more, as I was performing, I was on the road, I'd come back, yay, we're fine. I'd leave and I'd come back and they're a little less fine every time. And I want to say that started about 5 years ago. I've kind of lost track of time, because once you're in it, I went from being, I don't want to say carefree, but just caring about me, because they're adults, they take care of themselves, to all of a sudden I know their social security numbers, I know their doctor's names, I know what prescriptions they're on, what dosages, what time they take it. I just how did this happen to me? But it was a slow incremental thing. And it's I don't know, man, it's love. That's how they get you.
So your mom had dementia?
My mom my mom was diagnosed with dementia, most likely Alzheimer's. It is Alzheimer's. And so she was my problem child, so to speak, that presented first. Okay. And so she got all my energy, just trying to figure out what's going on. And in the behind the scenes, not so behind the scenes now, my dad's health started failing, but it wasn't that great.
Okay.
You know, and just the whole stress of this, you know, I learned that there are a lot of ologists, you know, neurologists, urologists, nephrologists. It's like, wow, why can't we just have a primary care physician? There's more. There's so much more.
Yes, right. And you're New York City based?
New York City based, New York City born and raised.
Okay. And your folks were close to you in terms of living close by?
Oh, extremely close. We have a 2-family house, and we're the family.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny, that started out, we didn't always have a 2-family house. We had a single-family home, and then it caught fire in the 90s. Okay. And my parents rebuilt it as a 2-family. And at the time, it was like they did it for me. So I'd have a place to come to when I was off the road, you know, not on the road performing. And those roles changed. They were looking out for me, and then I was looking out for them, which is great and terrible.
The reason to do this, so I suspect I have a lot of listeners who they can't relate. You know, like this is one of these things where you can't relate until suddenly you relate.
Oh, dude, I had no idea this world existed at all. It's like I tripped and literally fell down the rabbit hole. I had no idea taking care of or looking after or being worried about aging parents was a thing. And you're right. You don't know till you know. Yeah. And that's why I do the podcast. So if you're not there yet, maybe you won't be as blindsided. Maybe you can ease into it with a little bit of awareness instead of complete and total meltdown shock.
Yeah, I mean, I think that doing this, so one is like, you know, because you're the single person, there's this kind of natural, and I get it. Like my sister, so I went through this with my mom. My parents were divorced. My dad died when I was in my late 20s. I was sort of too young and not involved enough to be caregiving at that stage. Sadly, his mom was the primary caregiver. But when it came to my mom's decline happened sort of very slowly. It was over the course of maybe 15 years, with the last 7 or so being really bad, and the last, 3 or 4 being really terrible. And, in the case of my mom, I gave my sister a pass because she had 2 young children, a career, and my mom could be toxic and could be difficult. And so inviting that energy into my sister's life, I just didn't think was going to be good for anyone, frankly, especially the kids. And I just felt like I have the resources, I had the money, I had the flexibility. I didn't have the time, but I had the flexibility. And and I could handle her better than the average person. I had years of training. I had a great therapist. And I just knew that if I didn't do it, no one else was going to be able to, and that she was going to be worse off. And so I did it, and I think it was the hardest thing I ever did. It was, it was harder than my PhD, which was the second hardest thing. And so this is always sort of, and now my mom passed in 2012, and so now I have like a lot more distance from it all. But it's still, you know what I mean? I still think about it, and I still think about how much it took out of me, how much it forced me to grow, and so on. So let's talk a little bit about, because you've done something that I haven't done, which is I barely have ever talked about it.
And I can't shut up about it. I'm like, hello, have I told you about my adult toddlers?
Well, I think there's something, I think that's good, right? I think people need to hear about this. Like, they need to know that it's potentially on the horizon. They need to think about how they're going to plan for it, and I think that they need to talk about it earlier rather than later, and so on. So, maybe you could talk about some of the things that you've sort of learned. You have a talk, you have tips, right? You give advice to folks like us.
I do. And I'll tell you why I talk about this, and it's incredibly selfish. It started out selfish, and I think it still is.
Besides the fact that you're a comic?
Well, it's my mental health, man. You know, when this started happening, you know, any major change in your life, especially if it's to something unexpected and initially perceived as negative, you think you're the only one. You know, that this is only happening to you. Why me? And I was really struggling because these are, I should say, I liked my parents. You know, so I grew up loving them. We were a very loving family. And then when I became an adult, I actually liked these people. I liked who they were as people. And we spent lots of time together, you know, when I was not on the road. And so this shift in relationship, that decline in their health was a real shock to me. And as a comic, as an artist, you know, sometimes you process these things through your art. You know, it's no different than comics that get on stage and talk about dating, the pain of being married, the pain of getting divorced, of having kids. You know, you're sort of talking it out as you're living it. And at first I didn't want to do that because I thought, oh, you know, young people in the audience won't understand. And that's not true, because some of them are children of late in life parents, or they're taking care of grandparents, or they have folks in their family who, you know, who are sick and need help. So, you know, people come into this game on a lot of different levels. But that's what I learned when I started talking about it.
Yeah, that's great. I think, so did you start off by talking about it on stage, telling jokes about it?
I did. Like I'm sure I had a really frustrating day with my dad. I'm telling a story on stage, just being like comic angry about it. And once I started doing that, people would come up and tell me stories about their parents or their dad. Oh my gosh, Leanne, my dad, my mother-in-law, my this, my that. And I realized there's something here. Yes. And the stand-up stage wasn't always the place for it, because it does depend on the makeup of the audience. You know, these type of jokes wouldn't necessarily go over well if I were performing at a college or on a midnight, you know, a comedy club stage. And I felt it deserved another outlet. And so I started the podcast, just these little stories. That's how it started out. You know, I've branched off into doing interviews because, again, people want to talk about this experience, and I think that there are experiences other than mine that people can benefit from, particularly people who have moved past this, to let them know there is an after, and what do you do, which might be hard to really see when you're in it. And a lot of what I learned, you know, I learned the hard way. You know, I always heard of this, you know, mythical social worker that would swoop in out of nowhere and help you figure the system out. Yeah, I'm still waiting on my fairy godmother social worker. That didn't happen. But just, you know, just to ease into it. And it does help if you have a good relationship with your parents. It's exacerbated if you don't. Or it's also difficult if you're at a distance. You know, as much as I, you know, living in a 2-family house, and there were moments of, because they were right there. Yeah. You know, so if something happened, I was there. You know, I could make choices and decisions right on the spot. And I hear from people who don't live close. And it's a very scary, frustrating thing that makes their job and their worry even more difficult.
Yeah, indeed. So one of the things that I really like about your podcast is I really get the sense of your affection for your parents. Yeah. And so, like, you tease them, you make fun of them, you make jokes about what's happening, but I can see how it comes from a place of love. And that's, I think, really nice.
One of the things and I had to discover this along the way, and you can hear it, you know, in the through line of the podcast, is, you know, I would get angry or get upset about something that was happening, and then trying to take a step back and find that line between letting them have their independence and their dignity and having that respect, and then knowing when to step in and how to step in so that I don't rob them of those things. And and when to just walk away, when to just say, you know what, I'm not having this argument today. We're not arguing about food today, sir. If you want to eat all the peppermint candy, you may eat all the peppermint candy. I'm not gonna argue. So a big part of this, when you're in the trenches, is picking your battles.
Yeah, I think that's right.
You can't, because you're not going to win all the arguments, nor do you want to have all the arguments. You just don't.
And the thing that makes some of this reversal, as you talk about it, so difficult is, your parents aren't becoming children, right? They're still adults. And so it's not the same as a parent-child relationship where you can say, because I said so,
Although I did have a few of those moments. And it's best kept at a few, because at the time when I did use it, that my parents were like, oh gosh, you serious? We messed up.
That's funny. That's so interesting.
Oh, it had some authority, because again, why wouldn't I let them be the adults they've been longer than me?
And I think I think it is important for people to maintain their dignity, maintain their autonomy.
Yes.
Even when they have to, especially when they have to lean on the person that they used to be leaned on from, to have their children doing this.
And I in no way want to give the illusion that is in any way an easy dance to do.
I don't think
it is. It is a life dance where the steps change every day and you don't get a chance to practice. The music starts and go.
Yeah, I was doing mine long distance. So I was in Boulder, Colorado, and my mom was in New Jersey.
Tough.
And it was hard because, you get a phone call sometimes from a police officer or from a hospital or from a social worker or from her, you know what I mean? I'm in the hospital, these kinds of things. And, and so having to manage some of this stuff from afar is difficult. I
can't even imagine, because managing it here was challenging, and sometimes I wasn't always here. I'd be on the road. I'd be in another state. There was one time I was in another country. I was in South America. My dad calls me, because of course I kept my phone on. You can't ever turn your phone off, which is why I hate my phone. It's like, oh, who's calling now? Is it them? Is it the insurance company? Is it a doctor? It's just the fear of the ringing phone became a thing. But I'm in South America. The phone rings. It's my dad. And he doesn't have a concept that I'm not in the country. Okay. he doesn't. Like, that's where he was at that point. And I'm like, hey, Dad, what's up? He goes, oh, I'm just hungry. I haven't had anything to eat. And I'm like, that's weird. Because, I had a home attendant here for my mom, and their main thing was taking care of my mom, but they would also look after him as well. And I had to take him at face value. I just didn't know what to do about it in Argentina. And there's sometimes where your brain just freezes up with, what do I do? And I was on a corporate gig, and my friend said to me, he goes, just DoorDash him something. Just Uber Eats him something. I'm like, I can do that from here? He goes, yeah, you can. Yeah. So I just had some food delivered. And, it's very likely that he did eat and he just didn't remember, but I also didn't want to take that chance. And, again, if the shoe was on the other foot, my dad would not have hesitated to have gotten me something to eat.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a simple thing. It's not the he's in the hospital phone call. I can do something about the food. You eventually learn, even the hospital. Let people do what they do. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a geriatrician. If they are in good hands, sometimes you have to let them be in good hands. Yes,
I understand.
Yeah.
After my mom died, I started turning my phone off at night. So I turn my phone off when I sleep now.
Yeah.
It's like
jealous.
It's a luxury.
Yes, it is.
That I didn't have for a long time. So you're still dealing with it. So what are some of, let's between the two of us do our best to kind of prepare our fellow solo listeners who may have to someday caregive a parent or two. What are the things that they should know, thinking about? What advice would you give them?
Okay, there's some very practical advice that I will only share from experience and not because I'm an attorney or an accountant.
Okay, normal caveats.
Yes, just throwing that out there.
This is not law or accounting advice.
No, maybe law and order advice, don't murder anybody. That's the best I could do on that front. But you want to know, I hate to phrase it this way, where's the money?
Yeah.
Where are the accounts? Whose name is on there? Do you have access in case of an emergency? You may not have that relationship, but where is stuff? Because you don't want to be asking those questions, and in a difficult or an emergency time. And I was very lucky because my mom, my name was on her accounts since I was a teenager, because she had that forethought. She thought it was important. Like, she would go to the bank and take me with her. She wanted the bank managers and everyone to know who I was. And at the time, as a very young woman, I didn't get it until the day I had to walk into the bank and do business without her, and there were no questions asked. They were like, "Hello, Miss Lord, how may we help you?" So so on my mom's side, I was coming from a very fortunate situation. My dad, on the other hand, had this huge distrust of the internet. I don't want to do anything online. Just write things in my checkbook. And I'm like, sir. It was just this fight, and I'm like, you don't understand, Dad. You were in the military. You worked for the city. You own a home. You are in the matrix. They have you. Right. Writing a physical check is not going to be any different than me paying bills online for you. And eventually I took that over. So knowing just not for nefarious reasons, but knowing the accounts, where they're held, can you get access, or do they still have access? And just so that financial part of it, do they have wills? Mm-hmm. Not that you even need to be in it. You may not be, but you should at least know what their wishes are, and again, these are not easy conversations.
No, they're not. I think of, so one of the things that I figured out, so I wrote down a few ideas. I have exactly the same thing that you have, which is, how do you plan for this? Because how do you get access? How do you get cooperation early? Because one of the things that I figured out is the government really protects older adults.
Yes.
So there's no, unless you have power of attorney, if you want your parent to do something they don't want, you basically have to go to court and show that they're unfit to make decisions for them. And that's not something that a judge will grant lightly.
No.
And so even if they're making bad choices with their money, with their health, with their home, whatever those things may be, especially if they're not a danger to others, and it's often hard to demonstrate they're a danger to themselves, the best route is through their cooperation. Because I don't know about your parents, but if I had ever tried that with my mom, she would have fought me to the very bitter end, and both of us would have been worse off, because I would have been removed from any sort of caregiving, and she would have been completely on her own. And so I think broaching that topic like ridiculously early, when it's not even a threat, is a good idea.
Yes, when they're not threatened, when they're not vulnerable, what if I wasn't here? What would happen? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, parents are kind of like us. They're human beings, and nobody thinks they're going to be 95 and vulnerable.
Yes, that's right.
Even if you plan for retirement, you may not plan for that.
Yes.
And so who's going to help you? Who's going to make those decisions? Who's going to keep you safe? Mm-hmm. Because the state is not, there are things in place to take care of the vulnerable on a governmental level. Do you really want the government looking out for you?
No.
Do you really want the government making those decisions? And even if they don't choose an adult child, they have to choose someone.
Yes.
who has their best interests at heart.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say, in terms of getting that information, if you can, please get a professional. If you have the wherewithal, or there are resources to get an elder care attorney that can help you navigate this and do the paperwork correctly, I advise that.
I think that's great.
That.
It helps that you have, so I'm a Gen Xer, and so parents were always seen as the enemy. Like you were, you're more of a millennial in at least in your approach, because you have this close relationship with your parents.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess that is millennial-like, but I'm very not. I'm very not millennial. I just had two old folks that I dig a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah, but that's one great benefit of this sort of new relationship. For the problems that it may cause at times with kids being sort of overly protected, one of the nice outcomes is that parents and their kids have a lot of affection for each other. They're friends and friendlier than my generation was, which was like, get me out and away. Yes, that's true.
They can be. Where, it really gets tricky is if the parent-adult-child relationship was never good.
That's true. It becomes very hard.
And yeah, and in that sense, and even if you do have a good relationship, please get a therapist.
Yes, I agree with that. I actually have that on my list. I have that on my list, which is, so I have the same thing for you, which is prepare early. Like it's worth it to prepare ridiculously early for these things, because it gets a conversation going. So for example, my sister and I had I don't have a partner, and obviously my parents have passed, so when I croak, it falls on her. And so, we had a conversation about, these are the things that are going to you. I want to be cremated, not buried. I want you to unplug me. Like, you know what I mean? All these kinds of things. Oh, so she has like a playbook that she can comfortably execute based upon, my wishes. And we did all this stuff way early, before it, hopefully, knock on wood, becomes a problem.
Yeah, because you never know when that's going to happen, and that's not necessarily age related.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So the one I have, and this is related to what you just said, is get help. So get help early. So you were talking about an elder care attorney. I think that people had never even heard of that before. No.
Right. Yeah, so, you don't get someone to defend you for murder unless that's in your playbook. Get someone who knows elder care.
Yeah, that's
because
great.
It's very specific. It's a whole nother world, and unless you've had some passing familiarity with it, you want somebody that knows the nuts and bolts and ins and outs.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned social workers. I had a mixed experience in my case with social workers. At times they were super helpful and useful, and other times less so. I mean, they're overworked, they're underpaid.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly important but difficult job. So that was more helpful when we were in crisis.
Yeah, that's usually when I would meet a person in that area.
In that role. And so don't be afraid to ask, the hospital if they have a social worker that you can speak to. What else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, they should be seeking you out if you're in the hospital, and that's usually what would happen. Find out or be sure that you're aware of what their medical conditions are. My dad offhandedly mentioned to me one day that he was tired of getting up in the middle of the night multiple times to pee. Okay. And so he was going to have surgery. And I'm like, what? My dad was 80 at the time, and I'm like, who's okay in surgery on an 80-year-old man? And I'm like, wait, what's your recovery time going to be like? Who's here to help you? What's going on? And so I started going to those appointments. I actually went to the appointment where he had to get cleared for surgery, and he didn't get cleared. They said, oh, you have to go to your cardiologist. And my dad's like, okay. And I'm like, you have a cardiologist? Like, I had no idea
I see.
And we set up the appointment. I'm like, okay, maybe I should go to this cardiology appointment. And I go, and the cardiologist, Dr. Singh, lovely man, is running down all the problems with my dad's heart. And my dad's sitting there real quiet, like none of this is news to him. It's all news to me. And I'm sitting there looking at my dad like, what?
I see.
And I'm like, okay, I need to start paying way more attention. And so, yeah, find out what conditions or medical conditions that they have, because in case of emergency, you might need to answer a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do they have a bad heart? Do they have a kidney problem? Are they on particularly what medications they're
Yeah.
Because they might not be in a position to answer those questions if something happens. And you can phrase it as if, like, I want to be your advocate. I want to be able to speak up for you in case you can't. The power of attorney really helps that, by the way.
Yeah.
But just from a knowledge point of view, you should know.
Yeah, I never had that with my mom. And we didn't have these conversations early. We never sat down. I mean, all of this was just trying to navigate all of this with her.
Oh, I know. I learned this on the job.
Yeah.
This was completely on the job. Yeah, I wish it wasn't. But
yeah, this is a long list as you start to look at this, right?
Yeah,
So
it's
attorney,
a very long list.
you might get an accountant involved. For example, it might be easier to have that money conversation with their accountant if they have one. Their doctors, plural, potentially social workers. You already talked about a therapist for yourself.
For yourself. Oh, absolutely. Don't skip an appointment. This is not where you say, oh, no, I'll be fine. Because that's the other thing we do. Especially if you have that caregiver thing, you will give more of yourself than taking care of yourself. And now is not the time. You cannot afford to let your care slide. Because there are statistics that, show that caregivers begin to get sicker than the people they're looking after.
Yes.
Or they get more depressed. And so it's not optional to engage in self-care, both physically and mentally. I think I went to the gym more, when my dad was here and was really sick than when he wasn't, because I knew I had to keep myself up. The energy required to manage multiple lives. It takes quite a bit.
I think it's a lot. The other one I wrote down, which I didn't do, was other caregivers, to find other people who are doing this and dealing with this. Like when you go through a breakup, you can talk to almost any of your friends because they've been through breakups.
Right.
But I was relatively young when I went through this, and so my peer group. I have friends who still have their parents. You know what I mean? Like, so I have friends who are just now starting this process. And so seeking out other caregivers to learn, from the folks who are in it or have gone through it, I think I would add to that list. Is there anyone else you would add to your list?
No, I do want to say caregiver support groups are very important because this experience can be isolating. Mm-hmm. It can be, and once again, you think you're all on your own. Gosh, if we haven't said this already, because you've talked about your sister, if you can, have a family meeting.
I see.
Don't let all this fall on one person, and if you can, divvy up the responsibilities. Okay, somebody's not hands-on, but they can make phone calls.
Yeah.
Or they can, be the voice on the other. This can't be, and for some people they are doing it all by themselves, but if there are siblings or cousins or aunts or uncles, hey, everybody gather around. This is what's happening.
I think that's good. I'm not disparaging my sister. I gave her the out.
No.
And, but she really stepped up when my mom died because she was close. And she dealt with the house, and she dealt with the, she really stepped up in that way, which would have been especially difficult for me to do from afar. Right. And so, in the case of my mom, there wasn't a lot of people to draw on, but for your point is a really good one, which is the village, right? So let's get the village together and see what people are able to do.
when I first started going through this, I got advice from several people along the same vein that it almost doesn't really matter how many people are in the family. You could have 10 brothers or sisters, and it falls to one person. There's always that one kid. Mm-hmm. And not that you should let that slide, but that's kind of what happens. But you really have to at least keep people informed, or try to get help. They can't help you if you don't ask. Now, if they ask and they don't give, okay.
Sure.
But better to voice it than hold that resentment, because that's going to pop out when you don't want it, probably at the funeral. It's going to be a fight.
That's good. I like that a lot. I think the idea of, no one ever teaches you how to do this stuff. Like, no one, and also, of course, is like families, good families have regular family meetings. They have conversations when things are going well. They plan their vacations, but we should also sit and plan for when things are not going to go well.
Right. And we didn't really have a formal plan. Just things were sort of put in place, and then it was like me finding Easter eggs of how to deal with it. And initially I didn't deal with it very well at all because I wanted my parents to be fine. I wanted them to be who they always were. And sometimes, it's difficult to see them with adult eyes.
Yeah.
That could be the toughest part, and to even acknowledge that they might need a little extra help.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. And obviously also when this tends to happen, people are they're building careers, they're busy with their own adult lives, and the idea of even just trying to carve out that time can be difficult.
That is an understatement.
What else? What are some of your other observations and tips you have for people?
Patience.
Okay.
And I will illustrate that this way. When I was 12 years old, 12 is not an easy age for a little girl. Mm-hmm. And, my dad was very attentive, and he was trying to talk to me, and he just wasn't making any headway with me, and he threw his hands up in the air, and he's like, baby, I'm doing the best I can. I've never had a 12-year-old daughter before. Fast forward to, he's 82, giving me a hard time, and I'm trying to talk to him and figure it out, and I realized I've never had an 82-year-old before.
Yes.
Nor has he been 82 before.
Yes,
this is his first time at bat, being an old man.
Yes.
And understanding what that means. How would you feel if someone suddenly said to you, you can't drive anymore? Mm-hmm. When you start losing some mental acuity, some freedom, the ability to do what you want when you want, and just doing that shift of point of view and understanding how challenging and scary that is. Mm-hmm. How scary it would be for you. So how must it feel for them? And they might not handle it well.
Yes.
And their anger or their resentment, if they're not angry, resentful people, isn't personal. And sometimes you got to give them a little space to handle that. There's a lot of diplomacy that goes on here.
I think you're right about that. I had written down compassion.
Yes.
This idea that, I think there's a tendency, especially for the kind of solo caregiver who steps up, right? So folks like you and me, the kind of person who goes, all right, this is on my shoulders. That person is usually not a screw up.
Right.
Right? They're like an overachiever, and they're, what's the saying is, if you want something done, give it to a busy person,
Yep.
And so, but the tendency is to have all the answers. Okay, this is what we're going to do next. Then we're going to do this. Then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. And let's just get it done. The problem, of course, is, this adult may not like your ideas, may not like your timelines, may be threatened by the loss of autonomy. especially, there comes a time where they shouldn't be in the home alone anymore. There's a transition to another space of assisted living and a nursing home, something like that, which is clear as day to you. But because their slide has been so incremental, they haven't seen the big change. Also, this is their home. Think about the American dream is you build a home and you live in it. And it's yours. It's your signal of success and independence and so on. And now someone wants to take that away from you.
Yeah. That's how it'll be perceived.
Yes. And having that, I like to use the word patience because you might need to have that conversation a number of times. You have to figure out.
Let's just say that up front. You're going to have the same conversation over and over again because folks don't remember. They say they forgot. They really didn't, leave logic at the front door. I spent about 1.5 years not understanding why my logical arguments were not being accepted. And I realized we had crossed over from logic land and nobody told me. I'm like, we're just going on feelings. Okay. I had made it really hard for myself by just trying to be type A, perfectionist. Here's my PowerPoint of how this is going to happen, you guys. And they were not impressed with me.
I get it. I went through the same thing. I found that it was because I couldn't dictate. I did not have power of attorney. I had to. Everything was a negotiation. I had to. For example, it was clear to me that my mom needed to move into an assisted living. Like there was no doubt about it. She had falls, she had a number of bad experiences. She was a danger to herself on her own. She would not agree to do that, and even more, she thought she was angry with me for doing it. And what I ended up having to do was, essentially say to her, I understand why you don't want to leave the house. I can't force you to do that. I will help you do it when you're ready to do it. I will pay for it. I will find it. I will let you vet it. You know what I mean? These are all of the things that you will do, that I will do and you will do in order for this to be the best situation possible. But then what I had to say to her was, but I cannot enable you to continue to make bad decisions. That is, you won't agree to move to assisted living, but I won't agree to do certain things that put you in danger. For example, so this was one on my list, was this idea of safety first, right? So there's a lot of things that need to be done, but the most important thing is to try to keep your parent as safe as possible. That they don't become a danger to themselves or others, especially others. Right? So this issue of driving comes up. And so at some point, my mom had become a dangerous driver, but her car had broken down, and she wanted me to get her a new car or a new used car. And I said, Mom, I can't. I know I'm not. I think you should be living in assisted living, so you don't need a car. I can't force you to do that, but I am also not going to get you a car. It's like, if you want to continue driving, you need to get a car yourself. You need to find that way to do that. I don't think you should have a car, though. I don't think that financially it makes any sense for you. And then I think from a safety standpoint for you and others, you shouldn't. But for her, the car was independent. This was pre-Uber, especially.
Yeah.
And so she was facing being more isolated. But I had to draw a line in the sand that was like, I know you want this car. I know I can afford to get you this car, but I'm not going to get you this car because it's bad for you. I'm not going to enable you to make bad decisions.
And sometimes, and this is particularly, for your listeners, if you don't have a problem being the bad guy and standing up and making that declaration, that's great. And even if you do, what might make that a little easier is to enlist a doctor. You know, the next time there's a medical intervention, you know, just kind of pull the doctor to the side and say, hey, can you talk to them about driving? And if it's a doctor that you have a relationship or you know, and it's not the emergency room doctor, unless they're there for a car accident, different thing. But sometimes they need to hear it from a professional. You know, and once again, the same way when you were a teenager, your parents can tell you something a million times. You hear it from your favorite celebrity, and now it's gospel. What? So again, you know, enlist allies, enlist people and friends. If your parent has a friend who stopped driving, even better. You know, because once again, we're influenced sometimes by our friends and not by our family. But the driving thing is huge.
It's really huge. But I don't think I could, like the insight I had, and by the way, almost all of these insights I got through the help of a therapist, which was how to have these conversations, which is to assure your parent how much you love them, care about them, how their health and well-being is your most important thing. But then not to, look, in the same way, like parents want their kids to be happy, but they care about their kids' health more than their happiness, right? So a parent, you know, will let you have a slice of cake, but they're not going to let you eat the whole cake, you know? And so parents are willing to disappoint their children for their children's well-being. Children should be willing to disappoint their parents for their parents' well-being. Agreed. And so those were hard conversations to have with my mom, where I just had to say, not going to force you to do anything you don't want, but I'm worried about you. I care about you. Here's what I think would be the best situation. And, you know, but I think she was much more isolated than I think the average person, but your point about bringing in professionals, doctors, bringing in friends in order to kind of communicate that message from someone who will be seen as sort of less threatening. I don't know, there's something about your kid telling you what to do.
Oh, yeah. Like, they can always pull the I changed your diapers card. Not a lot of people on the planet can pull that card on you. You know, and that's got to be jarring. But just that example, you know, you have to start thinking in a bigger, broader sense of what resources do you have? Because the tendency is to do, if I'm a recovering workaholic, control freak perfectionist. I'm like, I'm smart. I can just figure this all out. I can do it all myself. And then I wonder why I'm curled up in a ball in the corner at the end of the day. So you really have to start thinking in a bigger, broader picture. What are my resources? Who can I ask for help? Who can lend a word here? You know, so just because it's too big of a job. And also getting comfortable with the idea that you're not going to get it all done. And you can't do it all. My favorite word became no. No, we're not doing that. What would happen is, you know, they would have doctor's appointments, and I learned to group them, you know, from when I'm in town and when we can get the most done. And I thought we were having medical appointments. My parents thought we were having a social outing. So they would go, and the doctor's like, what's wrong? And they're like, oh, nothing. And I'm like, okay, wait. First of all, you've been complaining the whole time. We made the appointment for a specific reason. Here's what they say is wrong. That's number one. And then we would leave there. My dad would be like, hey, let's go to lunch. Let's go to the store. I'm like, these are different things, sir. That's a different outing. And had I let them, we would have just run around all day, you know, when they didn't have the energy and I didn't have the time.
I see. Yeah. Okay. What else comes to mind? Like, you know, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, I wish I knew this stuff when I was going through this thing.
Yeah, I do too. That's why I talk about it. And I can almost tell when I see my friends now or colleagues, there's a look. I swear there's an adult child look. Like they're frazzled, and it's, how did I get here? And I would see it when I took my dad in for appointments, or my mom in for appointments at the clinic, and I'd see other adult children there, and we were all just kind of shell-shocked. Like, is there a wine bar? Is there? Can I go just sit in the corner? Because especially in the beginning, can be a lot. Yeah. And if you don't have any help, but as much as you can get ahead of it, as much as you can get professional help, as much as you can make sure that you are taking care of yourself, as much as you can take some of the pressure off and realizing that there's just some stuff you can't do. And I'm a bookworm, so I always feel like the answer's in a book somewhere. Not always the case, but I do recommend Atul Gawande's book on being, because the title is Being Mortal.
Being Mortal, yes, Being Mortal.
Yes. And I will tell you, that's a hard book to read. Like I read it 2 years ago. I couldn't have read it 3 years ago. And essentially, you follow him and his journey. He's a doctor. He writes a lot about geriatric issues. And it helps to get you comfortable with the idea that we don't last forever. There comes a point when you kind of have to make a decision between quality of life and quantity of life. And quantity does not equal quality. And what that means and what you want your time with your family, with people you love, to look like. And that's when you're in that spot, that's not easy. It's totally not easy.
Yeah, I think that book is outstanding. I'll put it in the exhibits. I read it too late, so I read it after.
Okay. I read it right in the middle, and middle as in terms of my dad, and it was life-changing. I cried through the first 2 chapters, but I said I'm going to finish it, and I'm glad that I did. It changed, it changed my outlook, and it helped me. It helped me understand that I was trying to do what my parents did. I was trying to be, Mr. and Mrs. Fix-It all in one. Like, that's what they were in my life. If there's a problem, we'll fix it. We'll handle it. We'll do it. And there's some stuff that can't be fixed.
Yes. There are a couple things that stood out in that book for me. One was, this idea, there's a figure in there where there's like a kind of drop-off in health quality. So what ends up happening is there's some event and there's a big drop in health quality. And then the medical community will get you up, but not all the way up to where you were before.
Nope.
And then there'll be another event, and it'll get you up, but not up. And so it's this sort of stepwise, like, imagine a set of steps going down, kind of this jagged set of steps going down. And that's what end of life looks like, is this sort of 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward kind of thing.
I always felt like we were on a sled, and I'm the head of the sled, and I'm managing this pell-mell downhill slide down the mountain somehow. That's kind of what it felt like, this plunge. But you mentioned, I guess I mentioned Atul Gawande, and you mentioned, how the medical folks intercede, and most of them, they want to do their best. Their job is to fix. And some of them have a very hard time with the idea that there's something that they can't fix or that this is the best they can do. They have a really hard time with that. And to compound that, we don't have enough geriatricians. And if I was going to make another recommendation for folks, it's to, if your parent is of a certain age, I don't know what age to call that, over 65, definitely over 70, the same way a child needs a pediatrician, an adult, a senior adult needs a geriatrician, because they are not just prescribing to symptoms. They can look head to toe and take in the totality of that person and include their age, because age becomes a factor. You read any bottle of Tylenol, Advil, whatever, up to age 65. That's on the label for a reason. Sometimes medicines have a different interaction with your body as when you're older.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think one of the things that struck me about the Being Mortal book was something I never would have thought of, and it was feet. So these geriatricians will take a look at their patients' feet.
Yeah.
And, like, what do the feet look like? What are the toenails like? Do they have a fungus? Are they washing? Are they it's like how something as simple as your feet can become an indicator for your general overall health and the care that you're undergoing and so on.
Yes.
It was fascinating to me. And it made me comfortable getting a pedicure.
Which I sorely miss at this time. I can't wait to go to a salon. I don't know, maybe sometime in 2022. I don't know.
Hopefully. And there's a whole bunch of other things in the book. The book's outstanding. I think it's really great. And then the need for purpose, I think, is something that comes up. People need something to live for. They need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. They need a reason to take good care of themselves. They're not, these are adults. These are people who live full lives. They raised families. They had careers.
Mm-hmm.
They need, I don't know the right word, but they need compelling things to do. And I think that's something that is important to try to foster as a caregiver.
Man, I'm even trying to think about that now. I have some, birds of a feather, me and my type A friends. We have this discussion periodically that we need a hobby. We need something to do that's enjoyable and not sedentary. Because when you work, what do you do when you retire? What are you doing now? What are you interested in? And my dad, I was never worried about that with him because he was just a gadabout. He just loved running around town. He was more busy after he retired than when he had a job. He would come to me with my shows. He was that kind of guy. He always had stuff to do. Like he started going to the senior center and then he stopped. And I said, well, Dad, why'd you stop? He goes, because they're old and they're cranky and they're angry.
That's funny.
He likes being around young people.
From listening to your podcast, I was like, oh, I'd like Leanne's dad.
Oh, man, everybody loved my dad.
Yeah, he just seems like one of those guys who's just like a bit of the life of the party and, yeah. By the way, guess where you got it from?
And I don't even have it to the degree that he had it. My dad, he very charismatic, very, very thoughtful man. He had that ability to talk to the janitor and the CEO.
That's great.
And he's like, you really want to talk to the janitor, though, because he has the keys to everything. The CEO doesn't.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's great.
Now, I do want to say, on the other hand, my other one, my mom, she was always more a bit of a loner.
Okay.
I guess opposites attract. She liked being home and doing her photo albums and writing letters. So, the approach to how we deal with that with her was different because it's like you also can't change someone's personality.
Yes.
It's not just going to suddenly change. Like my dad, he'd rip and run and go to Atlantic City anytime. He loved it. So it's like, what do you do, to help people, continue working or finding a purpose that still fits who they are? Mm-hmm. That's really tricky. So it's almost a cautionary tale. Who am I now? Am I going to be that chick in 20 years? And is that sustainable? So I need a hobby.
Yeah, I think that's great. So let's do this. I'm going to add one thing to the list, and then I think we should transition. And the last thing we talk about is how do we prepare ourselves to be older people. So my last piece of advice is you don't have this luxury given your career choice, but some companies offer family leave. And so in the same way that you can take a leave of absence because you have a child, it's possible to take a leave of absence because you're caregiving someone.
Yeah.
And I did not do that. My university, I think, offers some form of family leave. I did not do that, and I, in hindsight, wish I had. It was so incredibly difficult to maintain everything that I was doing, trying to, to teach my classes, to publish research, to work on books, to try to have a social life, to take care of my own health and well-being, to caregive from afar. This is they call it benefits for a reason. Right, it's in the benefits department. I encourage people to take that benefit if they need it, and that's not something. There's this sort of like have a stiff upper lip. It doesn't feel the same as having kids and so on. No. I say take the family leave if it's offered to you.
Yes, flabby upper lip. Stop trying to white knuckle your way through this. You don't get any points for suffering.
Yes,
you just don't. And because of, my profession, because I'm, an independent freelance artist, it's, for most of my life, that's been wonderful. And then stuff like this happens. And yeah, there's no family leave when you work for yourself. But because of my career and how I book things and how I travel, what I did have was a little bit more flexibility.
I see. Yeah.
So I could be there for a Tuesday 2:00 appointment, and not necessarily every Tuesday, but when I was the one scheduling things, I knew when I was in or out of town. And so what looks like a negative ended up helping me, but was still incredibly hard. So man, so I agree. You're right. If there's a benefits department and you have that, sashay right on in there with no shame and help yourself.
I agree. There is no shame in it. It's there for a reason. So you've brought up a couple things that you talked about for younger people to consider. What's fascinating is people will prepare for their retirement. That is, they'll save money.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, some people will, but they prepare in no other way. And so let's just chat for a few moments as we wrap up about how do you prepare to become that, that older adult and head some of this off. So I have a book recommendation, which is, I'm pretty sure the name of it's called Younger Next Year. And it's a fun book. It's written as sort of a conversation between the author and his doctor. And one of the things that I remember, it had a big effect. I read it very young. It's sort of the kind of book you want to read in your 50s, 60s. But I read it in my 40s. But one of the things that, for example, came out was the importance of muscle mass.
Yes.
So, as a man, I think starting at age 40, the average man loses 1% of his muscle mass every year, which doesn't sound
if he does nothing.
I don't know.
Okay.
So I know the answer. I know the answer is this: is you can stave this off by doing weight training. Right. So if you're not weight training, you lose basically 1% of your muscle mass every year. Now that doesn't sound doesn't sound that bad, but the problem is that our muscles are incredibly important for our metabolism. They're important for our balance. They're important to be able to exercise and move around. They protect us from when we fall, right? There's all these things that muscle does for us. And so one of the pieces of advice is the importance for older adults to be trying to maintain and or build muscle, for example. And so
steroids, we should be on steroids. That's what I just heard.
Well, there are these sort of longevity folks who are focused on things like human growth hormone and, right. Things around that, those are out on the edges of I'm not sure that's right. That's always a good idea, right? Because if you take human growth hormone, it may be good for muscle, but it also helps your tumors grow. So, you got to be careful about some of that stuff. But you alluded to one, which is do you now today have habits and interests that will translate into your 70s and 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's and I know that sounds crazy to be thinking about that now, but I do.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely do. And right now for me, I don't want anything that's more sedentary.
Yes.
But I I periodically reteach myself how to play chess. Because it's a game I wish I'd learned earlier in life. I have this fantasy that it would teach me how to think better, but I still feel it keeps your mind sharp.
Yeah, I agree.
Thinking about moves and, objectives and, even if you're playing, on your phone, to me, that's a little bit better than solitaire. No judgment, yes. Just, in terms of sharpness.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. You want to challenge yourself, right? There's no reason to stop challenging yourself physically and mentally and socially right. Just because you're retired.
Right. Oh, gosh, no. The way I watched my dad do retirement, he seemed to go at life with even more gusto.
That's great.
Like the job was holding him back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a very different thing. I got very different lessons watching both of them, but I think that's why you need two, or I needed two, because I got so much out of both of them. But and this is a very personal pet peeve of mine. Get a hold of your stuff. Start cleaning and downsizing.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of stuff. Do you want to live in a home that reflects who you are, or do you want to live in a mausoleum of yourself?
Yes.
And understanding nobody wants your stuff. Just get a dumpster, get some contractor bags. No, they don't want it. They don't want that figurine you bought in 1982 at Great Adventure. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants it. Get rid of it.
Yeah, I always say that's like, the stuff that people are going to throw out when I die.
Yeah, and if you look at your home with that eye, you realize, wow, I am drowning in crap.
Yes.
And there's also a window on that. I mean, I like organization. I like cleaning. It might have been another career, who knows? But there's a woman I follow on YouTube who talks about this. She had an episode saying that you have to take charge of your stuff while you have the physical ability to do it.
Yeah.
Think about the energy it takes to clean. You're down on your knees, you're reaching, you're lifting stuff. If you're losing 1% muscle mass a year, can you do that when you're 70?
Yes.
Maybe not. And so having the ability to take care of your stuff and a lot, whoever you want it to go to, or what you want to throw out, or how you want to downsize, and you want to make those decisions before somebody has to come in and do it for you. Yes. Can you imagine somebody walking in and making decisions about your stuff while you're here? Yes. Now, when you're not here, you don't care, but you should. You should care, especially if you have loved ones. Do I want to leave this job for somebody else?
Mm-hmm. I think that's
great. We haven't thought that way.
I think there's something good. I think you and I might be cut from the same cloth. You strike me as a just even in your background that I can see that you're a tidy individual. And so,
dude, yeah, I can't. I will say the one thing I like to be tidy, but just having the opportunity to do a little bit more cleaning and a little bit more organizing and let me just make this area prettier. It just makes me feel better.
Yeah, I tend to break that way too. I think there is something that's useful about kind of purging and that sort of renewal. I like the idea of spring cleaning. I like the idea of cleaning out a closet and because I think that owning stuff that you don't really want is a burden.
Yes.
I think having a shirt that's in your closet that you'll never wear is more of a burden than the pain of donating it. That burst of pain of getting rid of it is a worthwhile pain versus the seeing it there and being tempted but knowing, I'm not going to, because that's wasted decision energy that you don't need to have.
And wasted space. And that the key word there is decision. Mm-hmm. You have to make a decision. Mm-hmm. Don't put that decision off on somebody else. You bought it. You put it in your closet. Make a decision.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say, you know what? I bought this with the best of intentions. I never wore it. Someone else will find some joy in this. Mm-hmm. Or I bought this 10 years ago. I'm not that person anymore.
Yes.
Even if you still fit it. It's not necessarily you ate a lot of tater tots and drank a lot of bourbon.
Yeah, no. I think it's important to feel good with the clothes that you wear, feel good in the space that you live in. So yeah, I think that I do think that, by the way, these sort of lessons as you prepare for older adulthood and for helping an older adult go hand in hand, right? So, helping your adults be healthier, for them to get exercise, for them to have purpose in life, mm-hmm. for them to be in a space that they feel proud of and feel comfortable in and are safe in. Mm-hmm.
On that safety note,
yes.
Let me just a word about stairs.
Oh, yes.
My two-family house. When they first bought the house, we have 2 flights of stairs. Mm-hmm. Which, when they originally bought the house in 1965, and everybody was young, I wasn't even here yet, but everybody's young, running up and down stairs. You don't think about what that's going to be when you're 60 mm-hmm. or when you're 70. and particularly when we have a culture that for the moment has decided to age in place, that flight of stairs might not be so easy in a few years, in a few years shorter than you think it might be.
Yes.
So one elevator, ranch style home, something that's easy on the body.
Yes.
Think of your surroundings. What's easy to do today may not be easy to do tomorrow, like shoveling snow.
Yeah, absolutely. I fell down a flight of stairs in my house, and thank God I was young and fit, and it just like bruised me up a bit. But as an older person, it could have been devastating. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, I expect that if someone's listening to this, the most important thing is that it's important to put this on the radar. Like, this may go smoothly, it may not be a problem, and so on, but to start thinking about it and to start having those conversations, I think is probably the first place to start, in part because it'll be a good way to gauge how cooperative your parents will be. And so if they're on board, they're like, you're absolutely right. We should do this. We don't have a will. We should work out power of attorney. We should start doing this. You can do it at a kind of more leisurely pace. You can start identifying some of the pitfalls, that they may have in terms of health conditions and so on. And then if they're not cooperative, that also can be useful to know what you're gearing
yourself up for the future fight. Better to know it than not.
Yes, that's right.
What can also be helpful? A horror story from their own age group. If they have a friend and they were fine and all of a sudden something happened and they needed help, and you hear about that, you're like, hey, Mom, I heard, Aunt so-and-so or your friend, Kristen, and saying, wow, what would we do? Sometimes finding that point of entry other than, okay, what are the bank accounts and what are your doctor's names? You don't want to necessarily bulldoze your way in.
Yes.
But yeah, just another tip to maybe give that an easier point of entry.
I think that's great. That's great advice. I have these conversations. So this is bear with me on this tangent for a moment. I have, occasionally I'll have a student in a program who's not a good fit. They're not doing well. They're struggling. They're not happy. The program's not happy. No one's happy. And if it keeps going, there's a chance they're going to get thrown out of the program, right? That's the worry, and that's bad, right? Like you don't want the stigma of that and so on. And so what I will often do is I'll just sit them down and I'll just ask them how it's going, and then I'll just raise some possibilities. And I just say, here are 3 different possibilities as I see this. I'm not endorsing any of them. I just want you to hear them. I want you to think about them. And I want us to revisit this at some time, in the future. And then I let them go off and do their thing. That can be a good first step, which is, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, I know this is way early, but there's these things that I want to start us to talk about, and there's these different kind of scenarios, and I just want to bring it up, and I just want you to think about it. And we could talk about it at some later date. And so then now there's no surprises. They get a chance to talk about it, think about it. They can choose to ignore it if they want, but they know it's coming back at some period of time. And so. Yeah,
it's the cat versus dog approach. You can surprise a dog. A dog's always going to be happy. The cat, you gotta take your time. You gotta take your time. You gotta ease into it. Let the cat get comfortable. I can only say this as a new cat mom, or I should say cat consort.
That's funny. That's great. And then I think if you're in it, if you're in the thick of it right now, the big one talking to you and hearing it is this idea of you got to take care of yourself first. And I use the safety briefing for planes, which is oxygen masks may fall from the ceiling. please put your oxygen mask on before helping others. And I think that is the number one thing when it comes to adult caregiving.
I think people hear that. You've heard it your entire life, as a traveler. You don't really get it until you're drowning. You are darn near drowning, and you go, oh, I should have put my mask on.
Yes.
And trust me, people will hear this and they will still, flail about. And some folks have to learn stuff the hard way. And this is one of those hard lessons that if I'm not okay, I reached this point where I realized if I'm not okay, all of this falls apart.
Yes.
Every bit of it. Because I used to tease them. I'm like, you guys wouldn't last 6 months without me. And then it stopped being a joke. And it stopped being 6 months.
Yeah, that's right.
It was 3 months. It was a month. It was a week.
Yeah.
It got that dire. And I'm like, if it's that dire and it's riding on me, guess what? I'm taking care of me.
Yeah.
Because
great.
Taking care of me takes care of y'all.
Leanne, you are great. You have so much wisdom, and you communicate it in such a funny way.
Thank you.
If you're not thinking about a book, I think you should think about a book.
I actually am thinking about a book. I mean, again, my podcast, the first, I can't believe it's been 3 years, are largely these little stories, that are all written. I have them all. And so, it's compiling them, not just for the podcast, but for a book that I think will make people smile and, grab for a Kleenex.
Yes, I think it's great. You have a lot of wisdom to share with the world, and I appreciate you taking the time to
thank
share
you for
it
the
with
invitation. This is great. I love this.
It's great. So thanks again for your time. You people can find you where?
My website is veryfunnylady.com.
Yes.
And I am on all social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on YouTube, Leanne Lord Comedy on YouTube, because I've been posting a lot more video lately since people seem to need entertainment much more, since we're not necessarily enjoying it in live format right now. And my podcast, you can find it anywhere where you would get your favorite podcast, but the source of it is peoplewithparents.com.
It's great. Leanne, thanks again. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the Single Person's Guide